Close your eyes. Turn off the lights. Take a deep breath. Now imagine. Everything I say is happening to you. Not just hearing it, living it. I should have known something was wrong when my passenger asked me to turn off the dash cam. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because what happened that night in Phoenix changed everything I thought I knew about the people who get into my car. I've been driving for Uber for 3 years now, ever since I got laid off from the auto plant in Tempe. The work isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and keeps me busy during the long desert nights when sleep doesn't come easy anyway. I stick to the safer parts of town mostly: Scottsdale, Paradise Valley, the college areas where drunk kids tip well, and the worst thing that happens is someone puking in my backseat. That Tuesday in October started like any other. The temperature had finally dropped below 90, and the snowbirds were just starting to trickle back into town. I was cruising near Sky Harbor Airport around 10 p.m., hoping to catch some late arrivals who'd pay surge pricing to avoid the taxi line. The ping came through at 10:47. Pickup at a hotel near the airport. Destination: some address in Ahwatukee I'd never heard of. The passenger was listed as Mike, with a 4.2 rating. Not great, but not terrible either. The trip would take me about 40 minutes round trip, which meant decent money. I pulled up to the Marriott and waited. A guy in his 30s walked out, average height, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he'd just gotten off a business flight. Clean-cut, normal looking. The kind of passenger you forget about 10 minutes after they get out. Mike. I called through the passenger window. He nodded and slid into the back seat. Thanks for picking me up so late. No problem, man. Long flight. Something like that. He was already looking at his phone, so I took the hint and pulled away from the curb. The GPS route took us south on I-10, then east toward the mountains. Normal enough. But about 20 minutes in, as we were passing through a stretch of desert with nothing but saguaro cacti and darkness on both sides, Mike leaned forward. Hey, can you take the next exit instead? I know a shortcut. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was still looking at his phone, but something in his voice had changed. Flatter. More focused. The GPS says to stay on the highway, I said. This route should be fastest. Trust me. I know these roads. Now, I've had plenty of passengers try to direct me around traffic or construction, so this wasn't unusual. But we were in the middle of nowhere. What shortcut could there possibly be? The thing is, I said, keeping my voice light, I get dinged by Uber if I deviate too much from the suggested route. Company policy. Mike was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'll tip extra. Cash. The exit was coming up fast. Something in my gut was telling me to stay on the highway, but the promise of cash was tempting. My rent was due next week and I was already behind on my car payment. Against my better judgment, I took the exit. The off-ramp led to a 2-lane road that curved into the desert. No streetlights. No other cars. Just the pale beam of my headlights cutting through the darkness and the distant glow of Phoenix in the rearview mirror. Where exactly are we going? I asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. Just keep driving. I'll tell you when to turn. The road seemed to go on forever, winding between rock formations and scrub brush. My phone's GPS had lost signal. Not unusual out here, but it made me feel more isolated, more vulnerable. After what felt like 20 minutes, Mike spoke again. Pull over here. I looked around. We were in the middle of absolutely nowhere. No houses, no businesses, just desert stretching in every direction. I don't see any address, I said. Just pull over. The tone of his voice had changed completely. Commanding. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I slowed the car but didn't stop. Look, man, I think there's been some kind of mistake. Maybe you entered the wrong address. Pull. Over. This time there was no mistaking the threat in his voice. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw that Mike was no longer looking at his phone. He was staring directly at me and his hand was reaching into his jacket. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to floor it, to get back to the highway, to get away from this guy. But I was trapped. He was directly behind me, and if he had a weapon... My hands were shaking as I started to pull over to the shoulder. The gravel crunched under my tires as I came to a stop. "Turn off the engine," Mike said. I hesitated. "Turn it off." I turned the key. The sudden silence was deafening. No engine noise, no air conditioning, just the sound of my own breathing and the faint whisper of wind through the desert. "Good," Mike said. "Now step out of the car." My mouth was dry as sand. "Look, whatever this is about. Step out of the car." I reached for the door handle, my heart hammering against my ribs. This was it. I was about to become another statistic, another missing person case that would maybe get mentioned on the local news for a day or two before everyone forgot about me. But as I opened the door, something strange happened. The interior lights came on, and in the sudden illumination, I saw Mike's face clearly for the first time since he'd gotten in the car. It wasn't the same face. The bone structure was similar, but the eyes were different. Darker. Older. And there was something else. A scar running from his left temple to his jaw that definitely hadn't been there at the hotel. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. But when I looked again, the face was different yet again. Younger this time, with lighter hair and no scar. "What the hell?" I started to say. That's when I saw the other cars. They were parked about 50 yards away, hidden behind a cluster of boulders. At least 4 of them, all with their lights off. And figures were moving between them, heading toward us. Mike, or whoever he really was, noticed my expression and turned to look. When he turned back to me, he was smiling, but it wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, showing too many teeth. "You shouldn't have come this way," he said, and his voice had changed too. It was layered now, like multiple people speaking at once. I didn't wait to hear more. I slammed the car door and hit the gas. The car fishtailed on the gravel as I spun it around, tires screaming. In the rearview mirror, I saw Mike, or the thing that looked like Mike, standing calmly in the road watching me go. He didn't try to chase me. He didn't need to. Because as I raced back toward the highway, I realized something that made my blood turn to ice. The road I was on wasn't the same road I'd taken to get here. The landscape was different. The rock formations were wrong. And up ahead, where the highway should have been, there was nothing but more desert stretching endlessly into the darkness. I've been driving for 6 hours now. My gas tank is nearly empty and I still haven't found the highway. Every road I take leads to another road that shouldn't exist. Every turn brings me deeper into a maze of asphalt that defies logic. And sometimes when I look in my rearview mirror, I see other cars following me. Cars that weren't there a second before. Cars filled with passengers who all have the same shifting, impossible faces. My phone has no signal. My GPS shows nothing but static. And the sun should have come up by now, but the sky remains stubbornly dark. I'm starting to think I'm never going to find my way home. The thing about driving nights in Chicago is that you see the city's true face. During the day, it's all business suits and tourists and people pretending everything's normal. But after midnight, when the bars close and the streets empty out, that's when the real Chicago shows itself. I learned this the hard way last November. I'd been driving for about 8 months by then, mostly weekends to supplement my income from the accounting firm where I worked during the day. But my wife had lost her job and we were struggling to make ends meet, so I started picking up weeknight shifts too. The night everything changed was a Thursday. Thanksgiving was a week away and the city had that pre-holiday energy. People staying out later, spending money they didn't have, trying to squeeze every drop of fun out of their paychecks before the bills came due. I was doing okay that night. Made about $150 between 6 p.m. and 1 a.m., mostly short rides around Lincoln Park and Old Town. Nothing unusual. Nothing that should have prepared me for what came next. At 1:23 a.m., I got a ping for a pickup in Chinatown. The passenger was listed as Sarah with a 5.0 rating. The destination was way up north, almost to Evanston. It would be a long ride, but the fare would be worth it. I found the address, a narrow alley between two restaurants that had closed hours ago. The streetlights down there were dim and most of the storefronts were dark. I parked at the mouth of the alley and called the passenger. "I'm here," I said when she answered. "Blue Honda Civic." "I see you," she said. Her voice was soft, almost whispered. "I'm coming." A minute later, a woman emerged from the shadows about halfway down the alley. She was young, maybe early 20s, with long black hair and pale skin. She wore a simple black dress and carried a small purse. Even from a distance, there was something ethereal about her, like she belonged in an old photograph. She slid into the back seat without a word. "Sarah?" I asked. She nodded. "Heading up north, right? The GPS says it'll take about 40 minutes. Another nod. She was looking out the window, watching the empty streets slide by. Her reflection in the glass was oddly faint, barely visible. I tried to make conversation a few times as we drove through downtown, but she only gave one-word answers or didn't respond at all. Some passengers are chatty, others prefer silence. I figured she was tired or maybe had a bad night, so I left her alone and focused on the road. We were about halfway to the destination, driving through a residential area where all the houses were dark, when Sarah finally spoke. "Can you turn up the heat?" she asked. "I'm cold." I checked the temperature gauge. It was already set to 75 degrees, and I was actually feeling a little warm in my jacket. But I turned it up anyway. "Better?" I asked. She didn't answer. A few minutes later, she spoke again. "Do you believe in ghosts?" The question caught me off guard. "Ghosts? I don't know. Never really thought about it." "They're everywhere," she said, her voice barely audible. "Most people just don't see them." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She was still staring out the window, but now her breath was fogging the glass despite the heat blasting from the vents. "Are you okay?" I asked. "You seem—" "I died here," she said suddenly. My foot instinctively moved toward the brake. "What?" 3 years ago. November 18th. A drunk driver ran a red light. She was still staring out the window, but now she was pointing at an intersection we were approaching. Right there. I looked where she was pointing. There was a small memorial on the corner. Flowers, a white cross, some stuffed animals. The kind of roadside shrine you see sometimes after fatal accidents. My hands were getting clammy on the steering wheel. "Look, Sarah, if this is some kind of joke." "Sarah Mitchell," she said, and now she was looking at me in the rearview mirror. Her eyes were completely black. 22 years old. Nursing student at Northwestern. I was walking home from my job at the hospital when it happened. I couldn't look away from those eyes. They were like holes in reality, sucking in light and giving nothing back. "The driver was never caught," she continued. "Hit and run. They found pieces of his headlight but never found him." I forced myself to look back at the road. We were almost to the intersection she'd pointed out. The memorial was clearly visible now, and I could make out a photograph attached to the cross. Even from a distance, I could see it was the same face sitting in my back seat. "This isn't real," I said, more to myself than to her. "This can't be real." "I've been trying to get home for 3 years," Sarah said. "But I can never make it. Every time I get close, I just fade away." I looked in the rearview mirror again. She was becoming translucent, her edges blurring like she was dissolving into the air. "Please," she whispered, and now her voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Help me get home. I should have stopped the car. I should have gotten out and run." But something about the desperation in her voice kept me driving. Maybe it was compassion, or maybe I was just too shocked to think clearly. The GPS directed me through a maze of residential streets until we reached a modest 2-story house with a small front yard. The porch light was on, and there were still lights on in some of the upstairs windows. "This is it," Sarah said. She was barely visible now, just a faint outline in the seat. "Home." I put the car in park and turned around to look at her. She was crying, tears that looked like drops of starlight on her vanishing cheeks. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for seeing me." And then she was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty back seat, trying to process what had just happened. The rational part of my mind was insisting it had been a hallucination, a stress-induced break from reality. But the car still smelled like her perfume, something floral and old-fashioned like lilacs. Finally, I got out of the car and walked up to the house. I didn't know what I was going to say, but I felt like I had to do something. I knocked on the door. After a minute, it opened to reveal a middle-aged woman in a bathrobe. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "I'm sorry to bother you so late," I said. "But I think I just gave a ride to someone who used to live here." "Sarah Mitchell?" The woman's face went white. She grabbed the doorframe for support. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Sarah was my daughter. She died 3 years ago." "I know," I said. "She told me." The woman, Sarah's mother, invited me inside. She made tea with shaking hands while I told her about the ride. When I finished, she was crying again. "Today is the anniversary," she said. "November 18th. 3 years ago tonight." She showed me photos of Sarah. The same face, the same sad eyes, the same black hair. In one picture, she was wearing the exact dress I'd seen in my car. "We always leave the porch light on," Sarah's mother said, "just in case she ever finds her way home." I left that house with more questions than answers. Did I really drive a ghost across Chicago? Was it all in my head? I'll never know for sure. But I do know this. The next morning, I checked the Uber app to see if the ride had been recorded. It was there, logged as a trip from Chinatown to that address in Evanston. 43 minutes. $67.50 fare. But according to the app, no passenger had ever been assigned to that ride. The pickup request had come from an account that didn't exist. And the payment never went through. The money just disappeared. I almost didn't take the call that night. My shift was supposed to end at 2 a.m., and I was already running late getting home to my apartment in Riverside. But the ping came through just as I was about to log off, and the fare looked good. Pickup in downtown LA, heading to some address in the Hollywood Hills. Enough money to cover my grocery budget for the week. So I said yes. The passenger was waiting outside a high-rise office building on Wilshire Boulevard. At first, I didn't see anyone, just empty sidewalks and the usual collection of homeless people settling in for the night. Then a man stepped out of the shadows near the building's entrance. He was tall and thin, probably in his 50s, wearing an expensive-looking suit that seemed oddly formal for 2 a.m. His hair was perfectly styled, and he carried himself with the kind of confidence that comes from money and power. "You're my Uber?" he asked as he approached the car. "That's me." "You're..." I checked my phone. "David." He nodded and got into the back seat. Immediately, the car filled with the smell of expensive cologne and something else. Something chemical and sharp that made my nose wrinkle. "Sorry I'm running late," he said as I pulled away from the curb. "Work ran longer than expected." "No problem," What kind of work keeps you at the office until 2 a.m.? He laughed, but it didn't sound genuine. The kind that pays well. Fair enough. In LA, everyone's got their hustle, and half the time it's better not to ask too many questions. The GPS directed us north through Hollywood, then up into the hills where the houses got bigger and the streets got darker. I'd driven up here before, usually picking up drunk celebrities or tech bros who'd lost their licenses to DUI charges. But tonight felt different. Quieter. Like the whole city was holding its breath. We were about halfway to the destination when David leaned forward. "You seem nervous," he said. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was studying me with pale blue eyes that seemed to catch light from nowhere. "Just tired," I said. "Long shift." "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus. Good name. Strong." He settled back in his seat. "Tell me, Marcus, do you believe in second chances?" "I guess. Depends on what you did the first time." Another laugh, darker this time. "What if I told you I could offer you something most people only dream of? Money, success, everything you've ever wanted." I kept my eyes on the road. In my line of work, you meet all kinds of people. Some are harmless eccentrics, others are completely unhinged. The trick is figuring out which is which before things go sideways. "I'd say that sounds too good to be true," I said. "Smart man. But what if it wasn't? What if all you had to do was make one small compromise?" The GPS indicated we were getting close to the destination. The houses up here were massive, gated estates with long driveways and security cameras. The kind of places where normal people like me weren't supposed to exist. "Turn here," David said, pointing to a narrow road that curved up the hillside. I followed his directions even though the GPS was telling me to go straight. The road was barely wide enough for one car, and it seemed to climb forever, winding between enormous houses that were mostly hidden behind tall hedges and stone walls. "Pull over here," David said after a few minutes. I looked around. We were at the top of the hill at what looked like a dead end. There was no house visible, just a small clearing with a wrought iron gate set into a stone wall. "I don't see any address," I said. "That's because this isn't on any map," David replied. He was getting out of the car before I could respond. "Come with me." "I really should get going," I said. "It's late and—" "Marcus." His voice had changed, become more commanding. "Come with me." Against my better judgment, I turned off the engine and got out. The air up here was different, thinner somehow, and filled with that same chemical smell I'd noticed in the car. David was standing by the gate, which had somehow opened without him touching it. Beyond the gate was a path that led down into darkness. "This is where I work," he said. "Would you like to see?" Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in the car and drive away. But there was something about David's presence that made it hard to think clearly. Like he was exerting some kind of gravitational pull on my thoughts. I followed him through the gate. The path was paved with smooth stones that seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight. It wound down through a grove of trees that didn't look like anything that should grow in Southern California. Tall, dark things with twisted branches and leaves that whispered in a wind I couldn't feel. After what felt like hours but was probably only a few minutes, we emerged into a circular clearing. In the center was a building that hurt to look at. Not because it was ugly, but because it seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once. The walls curved and folded in ways that didn't make geometric sense, and windows appeared and disappeared as you looked at them. "Impressive, isn't it?" David said. "We've been here much longer than the city. Longer than the state, actually." "What is this place?" I managed to ask. "A business. The oldest business in the world, you might say." He gestured toward the building. "We specialize in acquisitions." As he spoke, figures began emerging from the building. Dozens of them, all wearing the same expensive suits, all with the same pale blue eyes. They moved with perfect synchronization, like they were all controlled by the same mind. "Marcus," David said, "I'd like to offer you a job." I tried to back away, but my feet wouldn't move. It was like they were rooted to the ground. "The position comes with excellent benefits," David continued. "Eternal life, unlimited wealth, power beyond your wildest dreams. All we ask in return is your soul." The other figures had formed a circle around us now. They were all identical to David. Not similar, but exactly the same, down to the smallest detail. "I know what you're thinking," David said. "It sounds like something out of a horror movie. But I assure you we're quite real. We've been making these deals for millennia." "I want to go home," I said, surprised that I could still speak. "I'm afraid that's not an option." David smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too white. "You see, Marcus, the moment you stepped through that gate, you became our property. But don't worry, you'll find the transition much easier if you cooperate." That's when I noticed something that made my blood freeze. My shadow wasn't moving with me anymore. It was standing perfectly still, even as I tried to step backward. "Ah, you've noticed," David said. "Yes, we've already begun the process. Your shadow is the first to go, then your reflection, then your memories of who you used to be. By sunrise, you'll be one of us." I looked around desperately, searching for some way to escape. That's when I saw them. Other shadows scattered around the clearing, all of them unmoving, all of them belonging to people who were no longer there. "How many?" I whispered. "How many what? How many people have you done this to?" David's smile widened. "Oh, Marcus, you have no idea how long we've been in business." As he spoke, I felt something inside me beginning to fade. My thoughts were becoming cloudier, my memories more distant. I could feel myself starting to disappear one piece at a time. But then I remembered something. My phone. It was still in my pocket, and it had been recording everything since I'd started the ride. The Uber app tracks every trip, stores every conversation for safety purposes. With the last of my willpower, I pulled out the phone and hit the emergency button. The one that calls 911 and sends your location to the police. David saw what I was doing and lunged for the phone, but it was too late. The call had already gone through. "You fool," he snarled. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I couldn't answer. My voice was gone now, along with most of my memories. But somewhere in the distance I could hear sirens. The other figures began to panic, dispersing like smoke in the wind. David himself was flickering, becoming translucent. "This isn't over," he said as he faded away. "We'll find you again. We always do." The building began to collapse, folding in on itself like origami in reverse. The trees withered and turned to dust. Within minutes, the entire clearing was empty except for me and the sound of approaching police cars. I don't remember much of what happened next. I was found unconscious at the top of the hill, still sitting in my car. The police said I'd apparently had some kind of breakdown. They found me talking to an empty back seat, insisting that my passenger was still there. There was no gate, no path, no building, just an empty lot that had been vacant for decades. But I know what I saw. I know what happened to me up there. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through the city, I see David's face in my rearview mirror. Still smiling, still waiting. The Uber app shows that the ride was completed successfully. 5 stars from the passenger. But when I try to access the recording of our conversation, it's just static. And my shadow is still not quite right. Sometimes it moves a fraction of a second too late, like it's being controlled by someone else. I've stopped driving nights. I tell people it's because the money's better during the day, but that's not the real reason. The real reason is that I'm afraid of who might get in my car after midnight. because I know they're still out there waiting in the shadows between the streetlights, looking for their next ride. And next time I might not be lucky enough to escape,